I mean, for a long time now, this government has just been kind of backsliding on what it was willing to deliver under the title of HS2, of High Speed 2. And now there's essentially an almost total confirmation that pretty much everything except the sort of what I would describe as rump of the previously proposed project, running from Old Oak Common, which is a station 10 kilometres away from the proper terminus at Euston, up through Birmingham Interchange, which is near the Birmingham Airport, and into Birmingham Curzon Street. That's it. So despite all the physical works going on around Lichfield, there's no planned connection to the West Coast Main Line. There's no new line up to Manchester. Of course, 2 years ago they cancelled the new line up to Leeds. We really need to make sure we don't forget that. So, they've already cancelled half of the line in the north. They've now kind of reduced the service, and this is best viewed by thinking about the service pattern, which was originally 17 trains going in all different directions across the country, connecting most of the city of the major cities of the UK, kind of outside of the south and Wales. Now reduced to just a shuttle service, kind of a couple of trains an hour between London and Birmingham. Just a dramatic reduction. And for the infrastructure, that section of line is the most expensive part of the whole railway, and they've reduced it to just running a shuttle. It's a very dramatic reduction. This hasn't been 100% confirmed, but this government isn't going to confirm that 100%. It's given what we know about where this government is kind of scrabbling around for ideas. This is very likely to be what Treasury will confirm in advance of the next general election, certainly. I have to say that by this point, I'm sort of, I wouldn't say immune to it, but I've burned out, at the point at which my desperation and depression at the future for, my children, for my friends' children, for all the generations, but also for me. I'm nearly going to be at the end of my career before this thing eventually does, because don't get me wrong, whether the next Labour government or whether whoever the next government might be actually decides to build this thing, it's going to take much longer than it should have. It's going to cost a lot more because of the delays and the indecision. It's not going to be delivered before the end of my career. That's so painful, not just because of the fact that there are lots of immediate benefits from us doing this and having better public transport, but also we need to be reducing our emissions not by 2050 but as soon as possible, because every year we delay we add extra emissions. This is a key part of helping reduce our transport emissions. Electric cars do not solve all of our problems. They reduce exhaust pipe emissions and little else. So public transport expansion, as well as more walking and cycling, is all part of this. So yeah, it's frustrating, but I have to say, I wrote a piece back in 2018 predicting this would happen because HS2 did not exist within a broader transport strategy. The fundamental problem is that HS2 didn't exist within a broad transport strategy. As a result of that, it was destined to fail, absolutely destined to fail. We cannot, England now is on its own within the UK. Everywhere else has a longer term transport strategy. England does not. This is the consequence. Yeah, no, I think it probably isn't quite far enough, to be honest. If we think about why is HS2 important, it's not just about the fact that it's not just the fact we cannot build a high-speed railway line. This today, the 3rd of October, is the 40th anniversary of the first high-speed line we built, which was the Selby diversion, which was a short bit of East Coast Main Line. It was like 20 miles long. It's not a big deal. That was 40 years ago. We then took ages to then build High-Speed 1, which is the link to the Channel Tunnel. Since then, nothing. It's incredible we cannot build a new intercity line, but it represents so much more than that. It represents the inability of this country and the institutions of this country to do anything like forward planning, any strategic thinking, any thinking about the future, any commitment to the future. And absolutely, as Andy Burnham points out, and others, Tracy Brabin and others have said, within London, for places outside of the M25 to get the level of rail transport investment that London has seen over the last, since I was born, 1990 or so, since the start of the 90s, you need to spend about £5,000 per head. So places like Birmingham, Manchester would be looking at 10, 12 billion pounds that they deserve to have spent in their cities to catch up with London. That's just to catch up. That's not to go. And I'm not saying London shouldn't have that spend. No, it's right that London has that spend. We should be investing in public transport in our cities. The good investment in London means that lots of people can use public transport. It means that it doesn't matter if you can't afford a car. You have public transport options available to you, bus as well, of course. That hasn't happened outside of the M25. HS2 is a key part of local transport advancement. Lots of people think, it's an intercity line. No. it took the intercity line trains off onto their own network, allowing the existing railway to run more local services, more suburban services that people could use. That's why this is a story that's all about local transport, and how the Conservative Party and the current government are keen to erode any potential opportunities for those cities outside of London. I mean, there's two answers. Firstly, about 3 months ago, there was a paper, an internal government paper, kind of sent to the previous the current rail minister, saying that actually costs are broadly on track. There's an increase because of inflation, but that's what happens when inflation increases. Everything gets more expensive. But the key thing is all the benefits also increase, because we're just talking about the value of the pounding kind of changing over time. Therefore, the costs and benefits both increase. So actually, the reality is that inflation doesn't really matter. Once you get rid of, if you strip back inflation, the cost of the project hasn't escalated that much. Now, in terms of how it compares to other European projects, the main problem is that unlike most other countries, in fact, unlike every other country in the world that builds high-speed rail, we decided to put everything in one project basket. So whereas in Germany, France, Spain, their high-speed line, and I'm using rabbit ears here, covers the bit of railway that goes from just outside one city through fields to just outside another city, we have gone, we're doing that, we're doing the expensive city tunnels, we're expanding or building new massive kind of major city station terminals, we're buying the trains, we're building the depot. All that stuff we've chucked under the one name HS2. So when you divide that huge number by the number of miles that HS2 is, of course that number is higher than the equivalent smaller headline price per mile of projects elsewhere in Europe. So unfortunately, it's because we don't have that long-term strategy. We've gone, oh, well, everything has to fit under HS2. Take an example of Euston. One of the reasons Euston's costing so much is because Euston is Euston, the terminal of HS2 in London, is having to pay for massive upgrades to the TfL infrastructure. That's the London Underground infrastructure underneath Euston Station, because government pulled the plug on Crossrail 2, which was originally supposed to pay for that. So HS2 is now also having to pay for infrastructure that basically is London Underground infrastructure, because of the fact we don't have this long-term strategy for transport. So without that long-term strategy, it was inevitable that we would end up with a really big number that obviously then everyone divides by the number of miles and goes, why does it cost so much more? Yeah, everything that other countries do that we get annoyed that we don't have, like good cycle storage, like space for buggies, like children's spaces, family spaces, better catering, more space for, more legroom. All these things are things that we can't do because every seat counts, because our railways are so chock-a-block. You look on the East Coast Main Line, if you just added 12, if you added a bit of extra bike space, maybe taking 12 seats away from each train, that loses 5,000 seats a day, and we can't do that because every train is full. So HS2 allowed us to be much more flexible long term, not to mention freeing up space for us to open more branch lines, freeing up space for us to run more local services, to open more local stations. All these things that we can't do because of the fact that we need HS2 to get rid of those long distance services onto their own lines. So yeah, it's a real shortcoming. The rail industry is in a massive crisis at the moment for all sorts of reasons. The one thing it was banking on was having a bit more breathing space to do things like track maintenance, to do things like catching up on the backlog of aging earthworks, whatever it is, aging drainage, aging track, by having a bit more breathing space, because we're not desperately running as many services as we can. HS2 was supposed to help with that. Now that HS2 is gone, that crisis only deepens. I would ask him why he doesn't care about Britain's future. Why is he intent on eroding the future of Britain? Not just for me, not just for the generation behind me, for the generations in advance of us, the generations that are to follow. Because that's basically what he's done. He's said, I don't care about the future of Britain.